So welcome everybody, and welcome Francesca. So Francesca Amfitheatrof, I had to practice that, who is a multidisciplinary designer and curator, and has crisscrossed the worlds of furniture and jewellery, physical spaces, museums, in quite an incredible way. And currently, she is the artistic director of high and fine jewellery and watches at Louis Vuitton, and actually nipped over from Paris this evening to take part at Sarabande. From my point, I'm Harriet Quick. I'm a writer, journalist and author. So we want to dig straight into Louis Vuitton, and I know that the collection will be revealed in January.
It will be revealed in May. The first fine jewellery collection will be in stores, end of May, and then the first high jewellery collection will be launched in July. Right. I think it's going to be revealed to the press in January.
Right, with lots of NDAs to sign.
Yes.
So the point being, we can't really go into much detail about that.
No.
But
so wait and see.
What we want to talk about right now is, in sort of broad brushstrokes, what does Louis Vuitton represent to you? I mean, now we've got Nicolas Ghesquière, who's helming the ready-to-wear with his magical mix of sort of sci-fi and elegance. Virgil Abloh's joined to take over the menswear, and you can see these incredible sort of hand-stitched sweatshirts. I mean, there's a real period of change for this very storied maison, and probably the best known powerhouse name of luxury. What's your reading of LV, and what's your associations with the house?
You know, what I personally love about being at LV is that it's an inclusive place. It's a place which has this sort of attitude that it moves with the times, and it's a lab of different talents, and it's a place where there are intelligent conversations happening all the time, and it's run with vision. You know, there is an incredible CEO that I really do have the most interesting conversations with, and I learn so much, and it's a place that allows you to have, you know, the incredible resources that a French house, you know, has at its fingertips, and incredible possibilities. But at the same time, it's very much about allowing you to breathe. You know, I'm doing other projects outside of the house, which I'm encouraged to do, which is, you know, it can be surprising to be given the freedom, to be given the opportunity to bring different people to the house. You know, I see it very much as a house. I see it as a great luxury house. And I call it a house specific because I did feel that Tiffany is a brand. And I think it's a very different approach where it isn't about just the profits and the quickness of the economy of a brand, especially with a public company. So you have this enormous powerhouse, but at the same time, you're able to really have a conversation with a vision. So, you know, you talk about the visions of what you want to create, and it really starts with that. It starts with the creativity.
So that's the sort of cultural weight of the house.
Yeah, it's about your creative vision.
And Francesca, when you've worked for many great names across the board, from Alessi to Marni to Fendi to Asprey to Wedgwood, you know, many different product categories.
Yeah.
And previous to Louis Vuitton as creative director of Tiffany. But when you go into these roles, when you go into these interviews, what's exciting for you? What's the thing that cinches the deal there?
Well, I think you start to dream about what you can make. So you start to imagine the possibilities in your head, and you start this journey in your head. And I think I'm an enthusiast, so I start with the fact that you give me anything and I think how exciting. I never think, oh my God, this is going to be exhausting, it's so much work, how are we going to do this? The opposite. I think that having the thrill of dreaming up what it is that you want to create, having something to say, you know, having something that you want to kind of put out there, you know, being a creative, whether you're a painter or whether you're a writer or a jewelry designer, it's about being generous. So you need to just, you know, just to get that vision across, I suppose. And I think at the same time is to really try to understand each house. You know, and in a way, you know, I've been thrown into things which I just thought, well, yeah, I can do it. Why not? Give it a go. And I have a bit of a sort of not a daredevil attitude, but I just think, how brilliant, we can do this. And so I sort of put a lot of energy, and to me, it feeds me. You know, work feeds me. It just keeps me going. So I think you always have to have that. And I think the passion just comes across, you know, and the more you do it, you don't know what you're going to make. No idea. I mean, funnily enough, the piece that I put there, I haven't really looked at. I made that at the RCA. And that is how I started talking to Alberto Alessi. He saw that bracelet and we ended up making a fruit bowl. Who would have known?
Which is still in the collection.
Which is still being made today. And it's a Louis Vuitton flower. Who knew? You know, it's sort of funny. You just don't know where things are going to go. And I think as long as you stay open and as long as you're always going to make something, you know, the road is endless. And that's the fun of it.
And with Tiffany, you know, that was a very high-profile role with a lot of demands on it. And as you say, it's a brand and a very corporate organisation. I suppose the associations of Tiffany, you know, are a very sort of patrician American brand, and we might all know it through the little charms and trinkets that you want and desire as a young girl. But you entered with a very modernist language. What did you see there as possible?
Well, I think that Tiffany has had a lot of different lives, right? Tiffany's had some phenomenal periods. I mean, obviously, Louis Comfort Tiffany was an incredible visionary. The things that he did when you actually really look into the history, I mean, you know, he made, you know, watches and had a factory in Geneva that ended up being sold to, you know, to Patek. The inventions and the incredible vision, and it was the first, and it is the first American luxury brand. But Tiffany also went through the Avon days, you know, where it really wasn't at its highest peak. And I think it also went through the Elsa Peretti, you know, in the 70s and 60s. If you were anyone, you got a job at Tiffany, because that's where things were happening in New York. And you had, you know, this phenomenal man Jean Moore, making the most phenomenal windows you've ever seen that were like surrealist pictures. And he had Warhol doing one, and he had Rauschenberg doing another. And so there was this hub of activity and energy. And I think that when I went in there, I remembered that. You remember in my mind, those were the glorious years of Tiffany. You can't
repeat that. So
no,
what do you bring
but you do your modernist.
Current?
And I'm not a fussy designer. I'm not a Baroque decorative designer. I like a purity in design. And so I think I went in there very much with it's American good design. And the greatest moment of great American design was the 50s and 60s. So, you know, from the car industry to, you know, just furniture to art, you know, abstract expressionism. They went, why do we have to do a composition which is triangular and everything's imperceptive? Screw that. We're doing it our way. So, you know, that energy that there was in America in that period was phenomenal. And it's still today considered modernism. So for me, that's what I believed was right for Tiffany. And I was very clear, and I went in there that I had the tea collection already drawn in my sketchbook, and I'm like, we're doing this. And it was, you know, they showed me a lot of little trinkets, which is what they were planning to launch. And to me, it just seemed like more stuff.
More stuff, yeah.
And so I think the impact of when you have the possibility of working in a big brand like that, and with the advertising and everything behind you, you can make a mark. And if you get it right, you know, they've got something that's going to work for decades and decades and decades. I mean, you know, there's pieces from Elsa Peretti that still feel fresh today. That's good design, you know.
Were you
that's
ever
great.
worried at any point that it was a gamble, what you were presenting, because maybe it was quite divergent to... No.
I don't know. If I think something's good, I have confidence in it.
Yeah.
And I think with jewelry, you know, jewelry's something that lasts for decades and decades. It's got to be very well designed. It's got to have great proportions. It's got to be wearable. It's got to sit well. It's got to do all those things for it to last the test of time. And I don't look back. I just go. Right. And so I have, I suppose, this kind of obsession with it. And I think the tea collection just felt, I don't know, it felt like it was a magic moment, because also I went into a very large design team who had been designing the same thing for many, many years with no direction. And, you know, there hadn't been a creative director for years there. And for me, it was also a way to kind of bring a team together and to get to know them. So yes, I knew what I wanted it to be, but I also was testing everyone, and we all did it together, and it was an amazing way to kind of build a team. It stretched their capabilities because they had been stamping jewelry for a while. So to do something that is well engineered and minimalist is hard.
And what about the technical aspects that you introduced here? Because they
all the hinges were really that I love.
And the mix of ceramic. And
metal.
I
mean, I am a bench jeweler and a silversmith, so I know how to make jewelry. So I go in there with that knowledge, and I am able to work with the factories. You know, I speak Italian. I love going in a factory. I love hanging out with people there. I love getting to kind of like see what they can make and the inventions. And you find some little guy hidden at the back of a factory who's a genius. And you build these things with them. And I think that's where you kind of the magic happens. And Tiffany had been working with Italian factories for a while, but sort of left them. You know, they would just do things and they would buy their ideas, or, you know, they would work together on things. But it wasn't, they hadn't had this follow through for a while. So I love the engineering part. It's something that I really enjoy doing. And, you know, I studied metallurgy. I can do like different properties of gold, elastic gold, different colors. And so, you know, that chain, for example, that I'm wearing there is really, it has an ingenious little box. So it moves this way or that way, so it can never get tangled. If you pull it, it just becomes stronger. It can't be copied easily. It's a nightmare to make. So
and these are all your drawings for your
that's
sketches
what we
and
were
prototypes.
doing. Yeah, so that's the wall that we had.
And what is actually the process? Can you talk us through that
I sketch
process?
in a sketchbook.
Yeah.
I still sketch in a sketchbook. And then I work with the team, and I really work with everyone. And we work like we're in an art school. Yeah. You know, we do crits, everyone puts their work on the table, everybody tells you, I hate that, I love that, that's shit, that's good, you know, whatever. It's very open and democratic. And then, you know, I will edit it down. I tend to design massively. I design huge, everything goes, like no restrictions. And then I edit quite brutally. Yeah,
and
I
you
edit
also
a lot.
introduced very fine bespoke jewellery as well.
Which I'd never done before.
You'd never done before?
No.
But how much do you know? You already had a knowledge of gemology, presumably.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a gemologist, right? I'm not, so I can have to say that. I mean, I have an instinct where I do tend to luckily pick the right stones, but I always have the opportunity to work, well, I don't always. I did with Tiffany and I do at Louis Vuitton, to work with a gemologist. I do work now with a phenomenal woman, which is very unusual. And it's actually kind of great going with her to all the gem fairs because they see two women. It's a male world.
It's a male-dominated
and they're like, oh, here they come, you know. And it's actually really cool because she knows her stuff. And it's actually so much fun. And I love it. And I do have an eye, but I don't know the chemical properties. You know, you need to study that deeply.
So you've got the aesthetic eye.
Yeah, I'll see if a stone is moody or if it's happy or, you know, that life within a stone or, you know, there's it speaks to you, a stone, a little bit. And so with Tiffany, I think the fact that I hadn't really had the schooling, you know, the Place Vendôme schooling or the proper, I hadn't had that. I took it on a little bit as a fashion project. And so the jewelry is much younger and it's fun and it had this phenomenal impact on the industry. I mean, like the first collection, was on the red carpet, and it's Kate Blanchett. It was the cover of every single paper the next day. And she wore a black dress to the Oscars. Nobody wears a little black dress.
What went into that piece that she's wearing?
That piece was aquamarines cut, turquoise cabochons, diamonds, and it was just like sort of all kind of jumbled together, and it was all about just like where you place the stones and the balance and how it falls, and she saw that. And Kate Blanchett's quite amazing because she's really dedicated to what she wears. She spends time figuring it out with her stylist. She, I sent her sketches. I mean, not with the first necklace. The first necklace she picked, and she said, I'm wearing a little black dress. And she wore John Galliano Magella, which again, she's under a lot of contracts. She went all out, really. And, I'm sure people weren't that happy. But she looked amazing. And it sort of had an impact because it was an incredible, you had to have a necklace at the Oscars on a black dress. It's all about the necklace, basically. And then after that, we worked together quite a lot, and she wants to really get involved. And she chooses her pieces, and she's very keen to know like what the inspiration and everything else. So she's also regal. Not everyone can carry jewellery, and she really can. She's quite phenomenal like that.
What impact did those red carpet moments have for the brand? I mean, was it...
Huge.
I mean, is it instant?
Instant.
Right.
It's huge. Yeah.
So
the next day... And there was only one necklace, so, that's it.
Yeah.
But yeah, pretty much. It's quite big because it's the one moment where all eyes are on jewellery, really. And you start with, you start the kind of... the awards season, and it builds up to the Oscars, and then you end it with Cannes. So you've got a good 6 months of dressing people, and there's this whole thing of like, who's going to dress what? And I think a lot is, of course a lot is contracts, but I think when you start to make jewelry that has a youthfulness, that isn't like you're wearing a reproduction, or that you're wearing, something that could be in a museum, also, it isn't all just about the value. Then, you start to kind of get a relationship with a lot of these, you start relationships really, and we're all girls and we're all, working, and it kind of starts to become something a little bit deeper. It's not, a paid public appearance.
Bye-bye.
Gone to the next one the next day. Which is kind of great. So I think it was a very instinctive, quick thing that happened. And you work with the stylist, and you work with the brand. You work, there's a lot of effort goes into it. You don't just look like that. Massive amount of effort.
I was thinking back to that time when Tom Ford sort of said, I think it was the millennium sort of said, we'll all be wanting the same thing at the same time all over the world. In that era of globalization and homogenization. And he was right to many extents. Everybody did want that certain bag or that white dress. But now, 2018, we're probably in the flip side of that. It's almost like we want something very individual, but we also want to be part of a tribe. And it's very sort of paradoxical impact on our sense of desire. But when you look at a global brand, Tiffany, for Louis Vuitton, what do you understand to be the push and pull of the customer?
Well, I think it's a very interesting question, that. I think that moment of everybody following the same path has definitely gone. And that's gone in politics, that's gone socially. I mean, that is just, we're living under different times. I think a brand and a house, you want to feel that they get you. You want to feel that there's something, whether you're in Russia and China and America and Europe, that they're talking to you.
And you actually want a conversation on social media.
And then once they feel that they get you, then the conversation kind of opens, and then it deepens. But I think also they want to know that there's somebody there. All this era of formulaic marketing, you know, or buying into your market has tired.
Yeah.
So you want to know that people are there and passionate. I mean, look at Phoebe at Celine. You know, she didn't even want to speak to people that much, you know, through social media or anything like that. But she really was there in everything that she made. Look at Lee. There was a total expression of that person. And I think that's so lasting and so valuable. Elsa Peretti, you know, any designer that you feel that is that person talking to me, it has an incredible lasting effect within what they create.
And do you feel, you know, when you're doing those wonderful kind of lifestyle pieces that we saw flicking through earlier, and you're in your home in Connecticut, or you might be in the studio in New York or wherever it might, do you feel that you need to do those? And at what point do you think, God damn it, it's so invasive?
Yeah. I mean, look, when they say things like, your favorite holiday destination, you're like, okay. I mean, I only started using Instagram when I got the job at Tiffany. I'm like, you know, I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on Twitter, I'm not on any of those things. So I hardly post. I'm not even very good at it. So I'm not the best person at this. I think that, you know, coming into your home, yes, for the FT, yes. I also know the journalist really well. She's known me since I was at college. There's certain moments that you do, but I do think that I don't want to show everything about myself. I don't really want to share a lot of things.
So again,
I don't want
editing.
to. I don't want to share my kids. I don't want to share what creams I use. You know, whatever. I think there's definitely a fine line, and I think that, you know, mainly like you want to talk about the work. I mean, even. Same, you know, Louis Vuitton right now, same at Tiffany. Until I had a collection, I don't really want to go out there and talk about me. I mean, I'm here now doing exactly that.
Well, edit that out.
But, you know, you've got to be careful.
Yeah.
There's a lot of oversharing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of little mystery left, you know, and it's like, I mean, you know, it's kind of, yes, you do want to have a guilty pleasure and look behind the curtain, but you want to be just yourself doing it. I don't know, I don't like it when everybody tells you everything about their inspiration and what they dreamt last night, and I don't know.
It becomes too didactic as well.
The diet I'm on, it's like, so boring.
I want to talk about some of, you've covered so many areas, but also this curation work that you did with Damien Hirst, with the Chapman brothers, with various different exhibitions. How did that come about?
You know, it kind of came about very much through friendship.
And this is after you left college, right?
This is right after. I mean, you know, like, for example, Jake and Dinos and I, we've all known each other for a very long time, and we've been friends for a very long time. And because I've always been a maker and making jewellery, I would always make jewellery for them, and they would ask me about certain techniques for metals, and we would always have these conversations. And this is when no one was really that well known. And I was at Wedgwood. I had left Marnie. I was at Wedgwood. I was the creative director at Wedgwood, and I got a phone call, and I was actually on maternity leave, and I got a phone call from the CEO saying, Francesca, we are going to announce on the news tomorrow that we've gone bankrupt. And it upset me so much because it wasn't to do. Wedgwood had been in a lot of difficulty.
Yes.
But the owner of Wedgwood it was 2008, the whole world had gone upside down, you know, banks, car industry, everything was a mess. And Wedgwood was owned by a very wealthy man who had a bond that he couldn't pay to the banks. And he owned, you know, the Independent newspaper, Waterford, Wedgwood, and a lot of other things. And he was just basically pulling the plug on it all. And we had just got Wedgwood out of the red. We'd just broken even. And I loved Wedgwood. It was just, you know, the best archive I've ever seen, the most incredible English heritage. I mean, just phenomenal. And I just went, that's it. I don't want to work in retail anymore. I've had it. I had some jewellery in stores. I pulled all the jewellery and I went, that's it. I'm done. And I always had different people constantly ask me to work in the art world and constantly ask me. And I had done my own company, RSNA, and
Yeah.
we'd made all these chess sets and we've done all these different projects. So I was already working with artists, and a lot of clients and collectors had asked me for advice because I knew a lot of artists personally. And so it wasn't the gallery selling to them or, different institutions. It was literally like, I know they're working on this and it's not going to be ready for a year, but we can go and do a studio visit and you can get a first look. And it was done very much based on friendship and trust.
Yeah.
And so then I started to place pieces, and I then was asked by big collectors to work on shows. And then, for example, the Musée Oceanographique asked me if I would come up with an idea for a show because they were celebrating their centenary. And obviously, if you see this museum, it's this museum.
And this is in Monaco.
This is this incredible museum in Monaco, which houses the most incredible kind of specimens of deep sea diving, and Cousteau, everything that he found is housed in this museum. And it has these cases, these glass cases with incredible skeletons of, big fish, and it was just perfect for Damien. And so Damien went to see it, and it was just, phenomenal. And so that happened. And of course, I wasn't the sole curator. We worked with, his curator, and, Monaco was pretty complicated. But the amazing thing is we literally closed down Monaco every night for a month to install it, all the roads. The museum had to be completely reinforced. The pier had to be reinforced. The harbour had to be rebuilt. I mean, they literally rebuilt Monaco to get these incredible heavy-duty pieces in, that all the weight had to be spread. And it was phenomenal. And I think the record numbers of visitors was insane. And then, I did some shows in Korea, and I don't know, it was just all things that just happened because I had these very long-lasting friendships, I think, and there was just, an unsaid trust. And I'm not an art historian. I mean, I've studied history of art, and I grew up all over the world, so I know, I love art, but it isn't really my background. What I did learn and what it did teach me phenomenally is how to represent a person, an artist or a creative person, how to speak for them and represent them, and really to represent them in the best way possible. And I think that teaches you then how to work for a house.
Interesting.
And be able to convey a story that isn't just, I made this cup, it's round.
Yeah.
You actually can go deeply into representing that house and explaining your message in a way that is...
as if it were a live person.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And to very difficult customers sometimes, I imagine.
And in different languages. I mean, there was there's a Chapman piece, which is penguins versus white bears, and basically the penguins leave the South Pole and they go all the way to the North Pole and they eat all the white bear. And basically they never really see each other because they're on opposite ends of the globe. But this was the whole narrative, and I had to explain this to a French collector in French, and suddenly you're like, with art you sort of have to stretch your abilities in ways you're not used to.
Turns into charades. You also did extraordinary work at Gucci in Florence and actually created the Museo, which is still very popular and alive and working today. But what was that project? It's amazing that archive wasn't on show before.
So Gucci didn't have an archive until Tom Ford really started ready to wear, right? I mean, it's interesting because nobody really thinks of Tom Ford. Everybody thinks of Tom Ford as just being so successful from the get-go. And he actually, he really had to build the ready-to-wear. I mean, it's quite phenomenal. He didn't even have the abilities of doing shows. And so, he grew Gucci out of, not having that category at all. And it didn't have an archive because, the Gucci family history is pretty convoluted. And so he basically started this notion of the archive, and Gucci has an agreement with all the auction houses that whatever Gucci museum piece is offered to them, they have first option to buy. And they have started to put together this archive, and they have a proper archival strategy, which is very well run, very clear, and they buy, you know, pretty aggressively. And when I arrived at the Gucci Museo, they had this phenomenal building, which is in Piazza della Signoria, which is where the David is, where the Uffizi is, and it's where all the house of the guilds. So it's this incredible palazzo where, you know, if you were Michelangelo, you would have gone into the palazzo and you would have asked for the finance to build the David, or, you know, whatever it was, because the guilds paid for the artworks. It's what, you know, the Medici...
patrons.
Totally.
Yeah.
And so you're in this incredible building where you know all this history has happened and taken place. And they had what was once the chapel, which was the room for the art exhibition. And the art exhibition was all on loan from the Pinot collection. So there's this incredible resource of phenomenal artworks. And then you had all the archives. So I initially went in there to do all the art exhibitions. And I opened with Bill Viola, and then, you know, from then on we curated a number of shows, and it was very complicated because you're in Piazza della Signoria and you've got to install through a crane, you know, in the middle of the night or first thing in the morning. And then I started to work a lot with the actual archive, and that was great fun.
Because you've got everything in there, from sort of a crocodile handbag to a Cadillac with a Gucci interior.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's quite mind-boggling.
It's amazing. You've got guitars, you've got skis, you've got those 70s dresses with the like chain buttons. You've got some really cool stuff. And I tried everything on. Like, everything. So much fun.
Now I'm going to take you really back in time. And you were born in Tokyo. You've lived in Moscow, Rome, New York, and many other places.
Yeah.
And your father was a chief bureau critic for the Time magazine.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering what that itinerant lifestyle, plus what must be a pretty early education in the machinations of media, how did that impact on young Francesca?
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's not media, it's current affairs.
Right.
My father was obsessed with, and we lived a life all around current affairs. You know, if my father's, you know, the one thing he couldn't bear, if there was a war, he had to be there. You know, if there was anything that was happening that was life-changing, that was like, would impact anything, he had to be there. And so we were very political as a family. And I had, you know, when I was 9 years old, on my jeans jacket, I had like Solidarność badges and Lech Walesa, and I was all for the shipyard workers in Poland. You know, I didn't have Hello Kitty badges. I was very, it was like, we watched the news in the evening and we talked about it, and that was what we did. Yeah. And then we talked about history and the impact. And so, I mean, the one thing, my father's not alive anymore, and in a way, I also think, thank God. He'd be heartbroken, you know, as a very, and as an American. So I think that our life was, it was strange, you know.
And was your mum in the same field?
No, my mother was in fashion.
Yeah.
So my mother was very glamorous, blonde. Everyone says I look Italian. My mum's blonde, green eyes. But my mum worked for Valentino. Mm-hmm. So my mother, I always remember my mother in like head to toe Valentino, perfume, walking out and leaving. And my father instead, you know, getting in a Fiat 500, like driving to the Spanish Steps. My father instead would disappear, literally, because he would get calls in the middle of the night by this guy called Dick Duncan, I still remember, who was head of all the bureau chiefs. And they would say, you know, you have to, there's a plane waiting for you, you're gone. And you'd get a telex like 2 weeks later saying, I'm, you know, on the Rainbow Warrior, you know, or wherever, I'm, you know, in a war zone here, or wherever it was, or, you know, I'm interviewing Sinn Féin and I've been in the boot of a car for the last 10 hours, or, you know, he did amazing things, my father, and it was all very for a cause that felt like a higher cause, in a way, and it was journalism that sort of is rare to find today, and we would always go to these hotels when my parents were actually around, which wasn't that often, but we'd go to these hotels in every country we lived in where the bureau chiefs would meet. And they were like Hemingway characters. They all had like safari jackets and like dirt on them. And they'd all talk about like war stories. And it was men. Like, as a kid, you were like, oh, you know. And they had amazing stories, and they're all the life photographers and all the time. And it was still owned by Henry Luce, and, you know, you were in a family that was a very odd, they were big drinkers. They all drank all the time. And it was a very particular world that is, I don't know, does it, I mean, it still exists really if you're a war correspondent in a way. But it was a very, and it was, and you know, I know some people ask me if my father was a spy. I don't know. I don't know. I mean, you know, my dad went to Choate, Harvard time. He ended up in Moscow during the Cold War. I wouldn't know, because he was good.
Very good.
But it was a very interesting, it was a world that is sort of gone, but it was a very interesting world. And
but
it was,
for you, moving from school to school and making new friends, was that?
It wasn't, you know, I mean, I don't know. I didn't struggle with it. My sister maybe didn't, was a little bit older. I did, when they moved to Moscow, I did go to boarding school here, and that, and I just stayed. And my biggest question in my life was always, like, where am I going to live? And then, you know, I mean, look at me now. I live in New York, I work in Paris. It still doesn't make much sense. So I think that that's just the way it is. You know, and I think I am at home in a lot of different places. I literally feel at home in a lot of cities. I feel very familiar to a lot of places. They feel familiar to me.
So what was that thing then that got you to Central St. Martin's and RCA? Why jewellery?
Yeah. So when I was at school, when I was doing my art A-level, my art teacher had a boyfriend who came in. And he taught us how to make jewellery. We had like a 1-week class. And I made a hairpiece, I remember, in silver, and with an ebony stick going through it. And I loved it. I really loved it. And then you know, my father wanted me to go to Harvard, like dead set. I had to go to university. We went around, we saw Yale, Princeton, Harvard. You know, I was meant to go to a university in America, had to be Ivy League. And I didn't want to go, and I didn't want to take SATs, and I didn't like the questions, and I secretly applied to art school and got a grant. And I was like, see ya. And I left, and I did it all on my own, and then I got a grant at Central, and I got one at the RCA. So I kind of was pretty quickly independent. And I just, I didn't know I was going to do jewellery. I did a foundation. I thought I was going to do textiles. I was terrible at it. I really thought that was colour was what I was going to do, and I was not very good. So, you know, at foundation, you try different things, and it's a great year. You learn what you're good at and what you're bad at. And it narrowed down to definitely something three-dimensional, and I love metal. I love metal.
So this was one of the first pieces you made on this cabinet.
At the end. That was after the RCA. I did that, and in my.
Can you remember what were the other kind of pieces that you experimented with?
I made well, this thing about drilling holes got out of control. I made a lot of things with holes in them.
So and I even made blinds here.
I love them.
Yes.
I even made a tea strainer. I made everything with holes. And then Alberto Alessi came up to me and he said, you know, I've just been doing a course in silversmithing, and you know, I have a steel factory, and I see that there's this real difference between silversmithing and industrialization, and I want you to come. And so I went and started working with them, and it's like a family, Alessi, and I still work with them now. And it's a very unusual place, Alessi, I have to say. It's a very kind, lovely environment. You know, and they let you have your name on the pieces, they pay you royalties. It's very different from how a lot of people would work. Yeah.
And with all this very high stimulation and constantly looking and evolving aesthetics and guiding tastes, do you ever kind of really seek mediocrity? I mean, do you want to go and sit in Dunkin' Donuts with a cup of bad coffee?
I live in America. I see Dunkin' Donuts. Actually, they're dropping donuts. Have you heard of this? There's a new branding. It's going to be called Dunkin'. It's all donuts. It's a new. God knows how much they paid to come to that idea and that conclusion, but they're dropping donuts. But, you know, I go to the petrol station and there's a Dunkin' Donuts. I mean, it's like, America is, you know, I do have those moments where, you know, I do the drive-through Starbucks and, you know, and you've got your Birkenstocks and you're driving an electric car and you go, who am I? This is scary. But I quite like, I don't know. You know, I've spent many, many summers going to Cape Cod, for example, where it's a time warp.
Yeah.
You know, it's like still the 1950s,
Yeah.
and it's amazing. You know, living in America, you live with a lot of that with you.
Yeah.
You know, but at the same time, because you have so much freedom in American space.
Yeah.
You have all this amazing space that you kind of have. You do have the time to yourself more.
So that's your brilliant antidote.
Yeah. And I think the other thing for me is, you know, I have in Paris the incredible savoir-faire, the amazing historical knowledge, this incredible beauty, this sort of refined sweetness that Paris have. And then in New York, I have the unbelievable progressive way of thinking where retail has changed dramatically. And it's all about, you know, D2C, direct to consumer. It's all about speaking with your own voice. It's a revolution.
So Europe's
and it's
catching
coming.
up with that.
Europe is miles behind. I have to
Yeah.
honestly say, not to be critical, but New York is at least 10 years ahead. And it's amazing what's happening.
Within that environment, which is instant, which is through Instagram, but who then become the arbiters of style, or is that a dinosaur concept?
No, I don't think so. I think that it's very much you are. Like, you are able to express yourself without having been told that you are, you know, officially stylish. I mean, I find the internet is the new underground. It's the new way of finding out if you're into something weird and wonderful, that there's somebody who's also into something weird and wonderful in Bangkok or in a village in Africa, or wherever it may be. It's the next underground. It's how you find, you know, but it's global.
Yeah.
The kind of the weirdos and the fun things and what's the next discourse, and that's really happening online. And I think that New York has this incredible energy behind really understanding that and pushing it,
And then using it.
and then you use it really well.
translating
And
it within business.
it's young, but it's so fast. And there you take that, you know, and you can do amazing things with.
And you're developing your own.
I am.
brand line.
I'm developing my own brand, which I'm going to launch in March.
Yeah.
And I've been working with these amazing, you know, sort of young agencies who are all digital and are incredible. They're really incredible. And they, you know, build all the latest platforms. And they also understand it. They understand, like, you know, it's not so difficult to grow your numbers on Instagram if you want to. You know, there's formulas for everything. And also how to cut all the middlemen out and how to, you know, just do things in a new way. And yes, it's disrupting a lot of things. And yes, there's a lot of people who are suffering from it, but the change is happening. It's just happening. And it is already, America is way ahead. And the interesting thing is, even though the technology is coming from the West Coast, the ideas and the implementation is coming from the East Coast. So Brooklyn, New York is really happening. Yeah.
So 2019, Francesca, is one big year for you.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So for the first one, I think that what's great is that you just evolve. Hopefully you get better and better. So, you know, in a way, the work that I did at Tiffany was right for then, but hopefully the work that I'm doing now at Louis Vuitton is even better. You just go deeper into it, because I think if you have those conversations with yourself, first of all, you've got to keep yourself very entertained. You can't just repeat yourself. You've just got to go to the next level and the next level. So I think that's what I'm currently, you know, the collection, for example, that I'm working on now, which, you know, with jewelry, the timelines are long. So when you work on a big collection, it takes a whole other year for it to be launched. So you have time to sit with it, and you have time to really do something amazing. So I think it just gets better and better. And then if I had to pick Oh, God, I don't know if it would be a piece of jewellery. I think there's so many odd, you know, things that I just love, from washing machines to, you know, the old phone that's the standing up one that you dial here. There's just pieces of design, whether it's a car or fine jewellery maybe wouldn't be the first place that I would go to. So I think everything's about a conversation. Anything good that happens in life is about a conversation. I think when you go in and you say, we are doing this and I don't want to hear anything about it, it never ends up that well. So I think that you want to have very, very intelligent conversations with the people you work with. Obviously, it's always a team effort, right? Masses of hours and, you know, energy and works goes into anything like that. I mean, it's on a huge scale and there's so many people involved, and from like the advertising to, you know, how it's going to be displayed in the windows to all of that. And the more you work, you know, the amazing thing is that Louis Vuitton there is an incredible group of people that I'm, you know, lucky enough to work with. And I think that Louis Vuitton has this ability of attracting really phenomenal talent and looking after it and keeping it. Because that's also very difficult. Some houses don't do that. They get scared, they change their mind, I don't know. But I think that keeping and looking after talent and allowing people to work together and saying, you guys go off and do it, is great. I think the vision, obviously, it has to originate from somewhere. And by, you know, whether it is a risk in some sort of sense, but you sort of, you know, you throw your energy into it, and you see, you know, when you do your presentations, when you bring the heads of the markets in, or the zone presidents, or whatever it is, you're constantly presenting your work to a lot of people. And so you see the reaction, you know, and it builds and it builds and it builds, and jewelry does take a whole year. So again, the build-up is fairly long. And then everyone's behind it, and it's quite phenomenal, and it's masses of, you know, incredible teamwork that goes into it. But I think it is about conversations. You know, if you can reach, when you go into these houses, if you can reach decisions through conversation, you're working with the right people, for sure. So I actually, when I came out of college, I started my own brand, but I don't think we even called them brands. It was just like, I started making things, and I did a show, and stores came and they bought my stuff, and then I was asked to do Trenoy, which was a fair in Paris during Fashion Week, and I didn't know what a pro forma was. I turned up with like a bag of jewelry and a bag of nails, and I didn't even have a hammer, and I hammered everything to this flimsy wall. And like, you know, people like Tony Gross from Cutler & Gross helped me out. He's like, what are you doing? I was like, I have no idea. And he's like, okay, you're only going to sell to these people because they're the only ones that pay you on time. So I'm going to send you the right people. And then Anya Heinmarch was starting. Jimmy Choo was starting. Nicolas Ghesquière was at Callaghan there. It was like, you know, everybody was sort of hustling, trying to make things happen. And we were all helping each other. Preen was downstairs. I mean, all people that, you know, just got out of bed one day and said, right, we're gonna pretend we know what we're doing, basically. I definitely did. And so I did that for years, and I was luckily well, from outside I was very successful in appearance. You know, I sold to all the main stores. I had the windows at Brown straight away. I was at Maxfield's, Barney's, whatever. I sold globally. And then it was only when Chanel asked me to work for them that I realized it was so much easier to just work for a house, make a lot of jewelry, hand it, and just, you know, take a great check. And so I realized that maybe it was a better route for me, because, you know, I was not good at like doing my taxes on time, or, you know, it was all very, you know, sort of done a little bit on the quirky side. But I had my brand, and I think that's how people got to know me in a way. And then when I wasn't at Tiffany anymore, and I spent a year, for the first time, not working, which was fantastic. And I started talking to Louis Vuitton pretty quickly, you know, but it was a long conversation. And in the meantime, I designed a whole collection. And then I sort of sat with it for a while, and I was like, I really want to do my thing. And I think when I never worked for anyone full time. Tiffany was my only experience, and it was corporate America, and it was very, very different from anything that I'd ever done before. And it's not really the world that really I belong to, in a way. I didn't, having this sort of quarter results and being driven by a very different attitude. And so I knew I wanted to do my own thing again. And so I kind of sat with it for a while, and it took me a while to figure out what it was going to be. And I knew I didn't want to do, it's very difficult today to launch a jewelry brand because stores don't support you like they used to, and they don't buy things, and they don't, it's too risky. They'd rather go for big brands that have advertising, that are well known. And so I didn't want to have that, it felt tired to me. So I took a while to figure it out, and I have a Formula One. I have a formula now that I think is much more in tune with the times and much lighter. I didn't want to do anything heavy. And so I feel that, I did a lot of jewelry really from the get-go that was different, and that it looked different, and it behaved differently, and it was done very early on, and I think it's still got value today. It maybe even has more, it's more with the times now even than it was back then. And I think that because I didn't have, behind me the force of a big house and that kind of budget, people just came along and they just copied everything. I mean, from I did the eyewear for Marnie. Marnie didn't advertise, so it was copied by everyone. So, it's fine, it's great, it's flattering to be copied, but after a while it's tiring. So I feel like a lot of ideas that I threw out there, some of them are really more in tune with the times now, in a way, and they have great value now. So you kind of go around the circle a long way to get back to certain things.
Hi, Francesca. So I was wondering, when you're designing for a big fashion house, there is usually a lot of big audiences. And do you ever find that you have to alter your style just to yield towards them?
So I think you have to really respect the house. You have to start with wanting to bring all the language of the house. Right? I think it's important. I think if you go into a house and you say the house is going to do what I want it to do, it doesn't work. You have to adapt yourself with really the philosophy of the house, the feeling of the house, the clients, and I think also because I'm a woman, I wear jewelry, I like to know that the pieces, they're realistic for me. They're not just something that you design and it's an abstract. I'm very aware of how pieces should feel, how much they should weigh, what clothes can you wear with them? And obviously, I've learned over the years, there are certain aspects that sell very well in certain parts of the world, whether it's different gold colors, it's different proportions, different dimensions. So I'm in tune with that. I know that from experience. I've also, I think, growing up all over the world has actually helped me a lot. Because I don't think, in Asia they're all like this, and in America they're all like that. I love going to places, and I love kind of finding out what places are really like. And so I have already a fine tune on what women like to wear. And I also think by now we are global. And so it becomes more united. You tweak things to appeal to different geographical locations. But overall, we do sort of have an overall, language. But you just learn it as you go along.
You touched on some really different relationships and a lot of different working environments. And I wondered what you've learned as a creative that you need from the other side, like the business side? What
That's
don't
such a
you?
good question.
What,
That is a really good question.
What don't you need, and what do you really need from the support of a board, a CEO, and what boundaries have you learned to put in place to protect
That's such
yourself
a good
as
question.
creative?
So number one, you have to have a good relationship with your CEO. Number one. Because, you know, everyone always talks about designers and they did this and get. No one ever looks at the board, at the executive board, at the CEO. And actually, if you don't have the support of the CEO, and if you don't have those conversations that I was talking about, where you are honestly sharing. I mean, you know, you look at any fashion house today that really is successful, is two people join forces and they go for it. They hold hands and they're like hell-bent on making it happen. And I think that is so crucial. And what's amazing is you can be as successful as you want. If you don't have the backing of that, you know, forget it. It just doesn't happen. So you need to know that you need to ask that person the questions. They're not interviewing you, you're interviewing them. And the minute you let them talk, and the minute you feel that they show their cards, always let them talk. And know that you have, obviously, you have to have your vision, you have to know what you want to make creatively, but you need to have that person backing you up and helping you, really helping you to get that message across in the right way and be truthful to you. Because the minute you start to see that that person is telling you something, but the minute you walk out, you're like, oh yeah, they're just a creative, you know, we'll deal with it. You know, then you know that you're in trouble. So you want to have a marriage of two people that's based on trust. And that is so crucial. And a lot of CEOs and a lot of executive boards, nobody ever really looks at them. And they can be a disaster. And they can make your life hell.